Hiya! So, my name's Gwen Diagram. Thank you for coming, really appreciate it. Today I'm talking about how to win with automation and influence people. So you can tweet me at Gwen Diagram. So, a little bit about me. I'm a principal test engineer at Sky in Leeds. I organise the Leeds Testing Atelier, which is a little punk rock conference in Leeds. It's our 7th one this time. So really LGBT friendly, lots of beer, lots of shouting because I'm there and I shout a lot, and it's really fun. So I also help run the Ministry of Testing meetup in Leeds, and I help run Agile Yorkshire, and I mess around a bit with Agile in Leeds. I'm a bit of a meetup and conference geek. I love it. I like meeting people and hanging out and shouting about cool stuff. So if you're ever over Leeds way, give me a shout and we'll hang out, talk about testing, Agile, and DevOps, have a fun time. So, I wrote the title of this talk, and then I realized I should actually read the book, which is How to Win Friends and Influence People. So it's a really awesome book from the 1930s by a guy called Dale Carnegie. He was an American writer and lecturer on how to be a better person and work well in business, and basically just in life as well. I listened to the original 1980s recording on Audible, and I really recommend it. The chap who narrates it, it might even be Dale. He's got a really beautiful old school American voice, and it's lovely to listen to. So I'm going to be using quite a few of Dale's teachings here. So look out for slides like this with a little quote from him. That's him, not me. So, how this all started. It started with an interview with the other senior tester and the principal engineer at the time. So in the interview, of course, I asked, what frameworks am I going to be using? So the frameworks that we used were Spock, Scala Test, Thucydides, which took me so long to learn how to say, which probably won't for Greek people, but God, it took me ages. But it's now called Serenity, JBehave, JUnit, Mocha, Karma, and Cucumber. So there were a lot. So then, of course, I asked what languages were used. I'm a C# kid, love C#, so they use Groovy, bless their souls, Java, and Scala. So, not all bad, but yeah, Groovy is definitely interesting. So it sounded like a fair bit of a mess. There was a lot of different frameworks and stuff like that. But it was actually a lot worse than it sounded. And I love messes. It's good fun. You've got to have something interesting to get into. So when I started, I joined the front-end team. So there was 2 front-end teams and a back-end team. All 3 were APIs. I worked on the identity part. Well, I worked on the identity part of the system. But both front ends were proxy APIs. The front end also has a really clunky website. It's not quite like this, but it's pretty clunky. So the front end I worked on had the API and the website as well. Both of these were written in Groovy, and we'd somehow managed to find Groovy developers, which are quite rare. And it also had a world of Siren JSON. So Siren JSON was too long to put on a vertical, but this is a little bit of a taste of Siren JSON. It's Helios, so it directs the user where to go after each interaction with the API. And it's really difficult to navigate around and really difficult to write tests for. So lots of POJOs going on there, basically. So when we looked into the tests that had been written, we discovered that there were no acceptance tests running as part of the build. Instead, they had these magical functional tests, which covered a lot of different layers of testing. So when people say functional tests, you're probably going to encounter some issues because they might not be able to describe what they're actually testing, what layer they're testing. They also had integration tests, which strangely, they were the functional tests, written with instead of a mock, they were actually testing against the real system. The tests at both layers were exactly the same. They were both written by the developers, and so they were just duplicated. No one could agree exactly what the functional tests were, which caused a lot of arguments. If you encounter this situation, I recommend getting the naming of test layers sorted really quickly, otherwise you're just going to have arguments constantly. Sorry, am I shouting too loud? Or is it? Okay. Cool. Okay. So what really happened here was we had a whole bunch of slow-running and flaky tests. At the start of my time there, we had a lot of image changes. And so the two front-end developers, they were working on making really simple changes and checking in their work. We had tests running on the build server, but the issue here was that these tests would take half an hour to run. And these were flaky, and so they'd fail. It would sometimes require 4 reruns to get the test to pass, even though the developers knew that they hadn't changed anything of significance to break the test. It was just image changes. So it would have been really easy to just exclude these tests because they were bullshit anyway from the build. But one person doing it means that everyone will do it and it will continue to be excluded. So don't encourage this kind of behavior. Encourage fixing the tests or writing new ones. So this was really bad for the developers because they couldn't get any feedback, any useful feedback. But when I first looked in how we were going to release this software as testers, it was looking even worse. There were some UI layer tests written in Thucydides, which was over the top of JBehave. So Thucydides and JBehave are both BDD frameworks. So how they managed to layer these on top of each other is absolutely beyond me. But it was really terrible, and they were really difficult to navigate around. And they ran using Selenium as a library. Cool. So I looked into Jenkins, and these tests hadn't been run in over 1.5 years either on the build server, so they're not actually testing anything. So we had absolutely no idea of how most of the system was meant to work, as there were no unit tests and no working UI level tests either. Changing things was pretty terrifying. The release system was we released an RPM to the test environments, and then 2 testers spent 2 days manually checking the different components. Now, I'm really fucking lazy. So my testers and I were having lunch one time and talking about how we were. One of the testers, he's really, really thorough. One of them, so. And me, I'm cowboy as fuck. There is no way in hell I want to spend 2 days testing some piece of shit system. So there are also some smoke tests, which were written in Groovy, but they won't run on the Jenkins box. So someone had upgraded, because someone had upgraded Firefox and not sorted out the tests. So these had to be run manually on your machine, and you had to ensure that you had the right version of Firefox, which last year it was Firefox 31, and Firefox was on version 46, so it was an absolute nightmare. But there were only 13 of these smoke tests, which was pretty cool. So as you can imagine, we had a test team that was totally champing at the bit to try and get some automation up and running so they didn't have to do those 2 days of manual checks. But they all had different opinions on how they wanted to do it. As testers, we generally write any language, although of course we have our favorite. As I said, mine's C#. So the mix that we had was we had 2 Ruby testers, we had 2 C# testers, we had 1 Java tester, and we had 1 Python tester. So everyone thinks their language is best because like C# totally is. But we needed a framework that everyone would use. And so, throw down a challenge. We needed to write these smoke tests, and the best way was to throw down a challenge. We would write it in our different languages that we'd chosen and present it back to the team. So we had a mix of Cucumber, Ruby, and Selenium, Gauge, Java, and Selenium, Cucumber, Java, and Selenium, and Cucumber, Python, and Selenium. And we gave everyone a week to do it in. This meant that everyone had a really fair chance on building their frameworks to show everyone else. Now, when I said to show everyone else, this is where it really became unfair, and I didn't think about it until it was actually happening. We didn't mention that part of building the framework meant that you had to show it to everyone at the end. And our team, well, it's quite large. There's about 60 people, so that's testers, developers, scrum masters, ops, which they call DevOps, but let's not go there. So the tester that built the framework the best, she was by far the best developer out of all of us. She's amazing. She ended up becoming a developer, but then going back to testing. She's cool. And she was writing it in a language that she really knew, which was Python. But she had a really unfair disadvantage in that she's really shy, and she hates getting up in front of people. So Python, although her framework was beautiful, it wasn't going to be chosen as the language. So when setting a challenge like this, ensure that it's fair, because her option, unfortunately, it really didn't stand a chance. Merely stating a truth isn't enough. The truth has to be made interesting, vivid, and dramatic. You have to use showmanship. The movies do it, television do it, and you have to do it too if you want attention. So, back to the presentations. We showed our different frameworks and explained the benefits of each. If you haven't heard of Gauge, it's an open source tool to write test cases in. It's really similar to Cucumber, except it doesn't need to follow the given, when, then pattern. Personally, I don't like the given, when, then pattern, as I've never heard anyone speak like that in my life, and so I don't see why I should write my tests like that. The only way I can get you to do anything is by giving you what you want. So Gauge also has some really amazing reporting. And working with developers previously, I knew that the developers that I'd worked with had absolutely loved the reporting from Gauge. Cucumber reports were quite clunky at the time and not as easy to follow as Gauge. I also knew that we had a bunch of JVM developers in the room, even if they focused on Groovy or Scala instead of Java. And so Java would most likely win them over because it's on the JVM. So we all voted and we chose Gauge and Java as the framework. Perhaps a little bit of showmanship, knowing what developers particularly liked and they helped, or I just chose the right framework to begin with. So it ended up that we had the developers on board with what we were going to be using across the board to write the new framework in, which is really important. Arouse in the other person an eager want. So it's really funny, because testers seem to get to write a lot more code than developers, especially when you're backfilling test cases. Here, we asked for help from our developers, and they assisted us with improving the test cases. We made our code way more fun to write than the developers' shitty image changes, and this encouraged cross-discipline pairing, which built a way stronger team. So we had the smoke tests written. These, of course, well, they were really the smallest of our worries. The smoke testers didn't stop the testers from having to perform 2 days of testing for a product. The smoke tests, well, they really gave us diddly squat, as they were something that actually ran, not on the CI, but they ran, and they were a really easy part of the system to tackle. The actual chunk of tests that were important here were the really horrific JBehave Serenity tests that weren't running and hadn't been running for a year and a half. And these were really hard to tackle. I mean, they were almost impossible. Several people had looked at these, but to absolutely no avail. They were really impenetrable in their messiness. So we decided to tackle something else in the meantime. Also, fixing those UI tests wouldn't be for the benefit of the entire team. There was only one team that actually had a UI. The rest of the teams, the proxy API and the API layer for the core system, wouldn't have benefited from the UI tests at all. We wouldn't have been able to share the knowledge that we'd learned of how we were building the tests. So instead, we started on the API acceptance tests. So unfortunately, this wasn't done in the same manner as choosing the frameworks. This was done as a bit more of a solo endeavor, and so the problems from this, they're still around, and I left that team in January. They're still there. So this isn't Dale, this is me, but don't choose technology as a solo, talk to people. It's very silly. So also the problem here was I was writing the API test for a system that used SAR and JSON, and luckily no one else used this because it's hard. So it's really complex, and the DTOs for it are really difficult to use. So we use JSON path, which is kind of like XPath, but for JSON, where the other testers use JSON or Jackson. Well, this caused all kind of headaches. This here was pretty much our largest mistake with these frameworks, and they're still paying for it. So they were looking into JSON-IDA to try and solve this, as basically we need to start from scratch in regards to a deserializer, as you would be surprised at how attached people get to their different libraries. So we're just going to need to replace it entirely. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. So we're not going to solve this issue by people shouting each other down by saying that Gieson or Jackson is better. And in the end, who cares? It's a fucking library. Just start anew. Libraries move on and they get way better. Sell the new and don't dwindle on the old. The library that I used to love in C#, Rest Sharp, that just doesn't exist anymore. You need to move on. Don't get stuck on stuff. On the topic of JSONiter, the way that we found out about JSONiter is the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. So one of our contractors spends an hour a month reviewing the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar to see what new and exciting tools have come about. But we use the Tech Radar for more than this. We've implemented the Tech Radar so choices like that won't bite you. Any proposals for new tools or library, they come through the Tech Radar, which is looked at once a week by the entire development team. And when we review pull requests that don't meet what's on the Tech Radar, we can reject them for that reason. Therefore, keep our code base coherent and clean. As I mentioned earlier, the front end of the system had almost no unit tests. So this was causing really long build times as these functional tests were written instead of unit tests. What's most surprising here, it was really surprising to me, is that the developers had to be trained in writing unit tests. So quite a few of the developers had actually never written unit tests before. And the idea of writing unit tests had to be sold to them. So again, talk in terms of the other person's interest. So we had to discuss with the developers what a unit test was and why it was a good idea to do it, why refactoring without unit tests is really scary, and what guidelines we had for unit tests. Focusing on refactoring meant that developers understood how doing this would help them out, and it wouldn't seem like just a lot of work for very little payoff. The front-end API was notoriously difficult to work in because it was groovy, therefore had a lot of groovy magic, and so touching one piece of code could change another dimension without you even knowing. So make what a unit is clear, but discuss this with your team. And so what we stated it should be was unit tests should cover isolated bits of code. If code is inherited from another class, do not test that class in the inheritance. Component tests should cover this. Derived classes, we're just testing change code. So you'll also remember I stated at the start that we had functional tests and integration tests that were the same without using any mocks. Just don't do that, that's weird. So code reviews from there on had to include the inclusion of unit tests. It was really a strange experience explaining unit tests to developers, but it was really worth it. Don't assume that people understand everything, because you'll find that sometimes they won't, but due to cultural differences, or they're just shy, sometimes they won't pipe up and say, hey, I don't know about this. So try and check. Which brings us to another section. While I was messing around with that component, there were some very, very large problems going on within another component, which was the back end. So there were constant arguments about two sets of tests, the cucumber tests and the gauge tests. The developers in this team, they had unit tests, thank God. So they were, fairly organized. They also had integration tests. And they had the testers writing the acceptance tests. The integration tests were written in Cucumber. Excuse me. So we had two testers on this. And then due to a set of circumstances, we had none. So it was about this point in time that it was starting to become apparent that component teams were not working for us. I'd moved into the proxy API team, and it was really interesting because I was so far away from this team that I had to learn how their entire system worked. People were in the same tribe working on pieces of software without knowing how another component that it interacted with worked at all. I had no idea how it worked. And it wasn't just the testers that had this problem, it was the developers as well. So the developers were writing different languages, and if someone was sitting over the other side of the office, there was a fair chance they didn't even know them. And we'd also had a new head of tech who joined, and he wanted to make his mark. And so I got promoted to test manager because I was the only senior left. And we came up with the idea of feature squads on an away day, and we worked together as the leadership team to work out how this could work. Let the other person feel like the idea is his or hers. So we came back from this away day, and without any planning at all, one of the Scrum Masters presented the idea of feature squads. This was a fucking disaster. This was beyond a disaster. There were pretty much riots. The way it was presented was in this overcomplicated diagram, which is so funny. I mean, check that out. And everyone thought it was a ridiculous idea because it was forced upon them, and maybe because of that diagram as well. So we set up working groups to discuss how we could actually get this implemented. The working groups identified issues that could come from working in feature squads, and we came back together to see how we could present it to the team, prepared. Dramatize your idea. So who here has seen the infomercial for Hello Nasty, the Beastie Boys album? Hey, brilliant. All right, I'm going to show you a clip of it. It's a work of art. It's overdone, it's ridiculous, and it's absolutely brilliant. Here's a clip.
The following program is a paid advertisement and expresses the opinions of the producers and not necessarily of this network. The Juice Ladies.
And we're back. Hi. I'm Peg. This is Viv.
Did you miss us?
And we're here with the super
you.
juicer today.
We had some trouble last week with the,
Little racy with raisins.
we had to rectify those raisins. We had to reduce. But
But
now,
everybody knows us because we have fun with fruit. You know what? Let's invite someone up here with us. They can share in this juice.
I think so.
Do we have a volunteer from the audience? Sir, in the front row?
Actually,
So fun. Come right in here.
now how are you feeling
Join us
today?
right in here.
I'm okay.
What's your name, sir?
My name is John.
Oh, John.
John.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Why don't you give that a try? Go on, give it a try.
Fun. Okay.
Wow!
Here, you can.
Now
really good.
We have a surprise for you. He'll love the second.
Woo! Woo!
Now look
The
what our
wild man.
second machine does. Go on, Viv. Show
You
us
are-
what the second machine
Now
does.
this machine is my favorite. What happens when we push this button
What happens?
is this.
Well, it's 50 cups of coffee and you know it's on. I move the crowd to the break of dawn. Keep walk for how without the party people. It's where we're getting down. We are all equal. No matter how we're between you and me. But I'm
How we were going to present the idea back, and I asked the team to watch a snippet of this. The thing with infomercials is they look into how to actually sell something, how to appeal to your audience. There is a specific formula, and if you have to present something that is this important, that is going to change the way that 60 people work, the entire way, make sure you prepare and look into how it's actually going to appeal to them. So, the structure I followed for that was this. Statement of what the problem was. Proposal of the solution. I had some testimonials. Concerns of the proposed solution and how the solution takes care of the concerns, and repetition of the solution. Repetition of the solution. With this kind of shit, you need to repeat yourself. So, everyone knew that I was using really cheap selling techniques, but I made it fun. It ended up that everyone agreed to work in feature teams because we actually prepared ourselves to sell the idea. And by including people in the discussions, it helped them feel that the idea was theirs. So by this point, we had people working across different components. We had people writing tests. and I was managing the testers, so I'd been able to start coaching them as well. It was by this point that we'd received the news that the bigwigs were coming up from London. I'm in Leeds in the north, you know, London, they come up, they lord over us and tell us what to do. So, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. We were told that we were going to have an hour with them. And with that, we had to present the technology strategy, the feature team strategy, and the testing strategy. Now, I didn't do this all by myself. I work with a really cool principal engineer. He speaks as well, and he'd noted what these higher-ups actually wanted, which could be found in their newsletters. So based on his entire technology strategy on that, which really worked perfectly, Joe knew what their interests were and based the technology on that, and they absolutely loved it because we were talking to their interests. I wasn't as lucky as that, of course, because apparently they hated testing. So I had to do things a little bit differently. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. When the higher-ups were coming, I was really excited. I hadn't met them before, and well, if you have them on your good side, it means that you can get funding for your products. So this was a pretty good opportunity to make a good impression on them. So I brought cake, I brought chocolates, I brought biscuits, whatever. People fucking love cake. If you have a visitor, provide food. Make them feel welcome and like you are excited to see them. I really was, but cake totally cemented that. Actions speak louder than words, and a smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I am really glad to see you. Look at them in their eyes. Shake their hands. Smile. They don't know you either, and yeah, they might get paid more, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to feel comfortable. Smile and make them feel welcome. I tend to do this a lot. So I did this with Lisa last night, but because she's not English, she was okay. If you do that to the English, they really freak out. So remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. There were only 3 people that we were presenting this to. If you're presenting an idea to a small group of people, call them out by name. Say how wonderful it is to have them, because it is. They've taken time out of their schedule to come and see you. Make them feel like it was worth it. So, although these people apparently couldn't give a fuck about testing, they left that room really happy, and they listened to me because I made them feel important. And well, I thought that they were really important for taking time out of their day as well. So, I'll show you what I showed them. Here's the test strategy that I used. You can steal it, it doesn't matter. So, hi, this is Identity's test strategy. First, I'm going to start with the basic theory of why we test. Testing creates confidence that your product will work, or perhaps the avoidance of doubt that your product will break. Sky should be a synonym for quality. We want to ensure that customers can log on to the platform at any time, whether to watch Friends at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday or to watch Game of Thrones at 9 p.m. on a Monday night. The Identity platform should be always available, frictionless, and secure for the customer. Via performance, load, security, and automated testing, we can create a Sky product that can be deployed quickly with known quality. Testing also ensures that we are delivering software of value. By aligning with the business on what scenarios are expected within the application, we can deliver a journey-driven solution which adds value to the product. But really, why test? A stable system isn't just for the customers. Working in the Spotify model, it isn't only the ops team on call, team members from all disciplines are on call. Creating a stable, tested piece of software means that your life is easier as a member of the Identity team, and you won't be the one getting woken up at 2 a.m. to keep the system up. So it's all very well and good wanting a system that is stable with a minimum amount of show-stopping bugs, but how do we actually create a quality system? Identity want to look at the testing pyramid a little bit differently. We would like to reimagine the test pyramid instead as a bug filter, Only bugs unable to be found by the prior component of testing will be able to reach the next stage of testing. We will cover unit, component, integration, acceptance, end-to-end testing, and exploratory testing. In the future, I would like to align the bug filter to our continuous deployment pipelines. Unit testing will be the layer with the largest amount of tests. Having a large unit testing layer has quite a few benefits. Unit tests are quick to write and run, and they greatly assist when refactoring units of code. If code is written without unit tests, it is very difficult to go back and refactor that code, as the developer will be unable to see if refactoring has broken anything. A component test is a test that limits the scope of the exercise software to a portion of the system under test. Component tests will frequently include mocked or stubbed components so that the tested functionality can be isolated to the component that the developer is interested in testing. Integration tests cover multiple components and will find issues between multiple components speaking to each other. Acceptance tests will be written to the acceptance criteria on a card and written in clear language that can be reused for business documentation for specific areas of functionality. And end-to-end tests cover user journeys and will be the journeys that customers are actually making through the product. Exploratory testing will only catch the most subtle bugs, bugs that haven't been able to be caught via automation. Next, I will be showing you how we are planning to make the identity tribe excellent through support and learning. Part of the purpose of the tests are also documentation around the application. These tests create many opportunities for learning, especially sharing knowledge across disciplines. Learning also brings us together and builds better bonds within the team. With strengthened communication, we should be able to work in a more cohesive manner to deliver more cohesive software. Developers and testers pair across the tribe, which promotes cross-learning. The developers learn more about testing, and the testers learn more about development. This also improves quality across the product, as 2 heads on each part of the process is way better than 1. Pairing also allows the sharing of technical knowledge and the development of shared techniques. More consistent code helps remove the mental barrier to exploring a previously written test, allowing the observer to focus on the testing element. Through the Testing Guild, we will be building up a mentoring relationship with the testers. We want to encourage the testers to grow in the right direction, and within Identity, we have many fantastic directions that they can go in. With our team interested in their work, we will be able to deliver better software. We've started chapterships within the tribe in Identity, where we are bringing all the testers, the Scrum Masters, and the developers together in their retrospective specialisms to share knowledge of common issues and solve them together as a team. Joe Swan has implemented Fat Fridays, where the tribe can work together to solve issues that have occurred during the sprints. During the Fat Friday times, we've solved pressing issues like building off branches, Dockerizing some of the applications, and working on test frameworks. This is also a great place for the team to learn together. While mentoring the testing team members, we can focus on where the individual is at the moment and where they want to be. If they're interested in security testing, we can pair them with someone in the tribe who has knowledge and recommend some courses for them, for example. We want our team members to be constantly learning and not only proud of their work, but to be proud of where they work. So, thanks for listening to me, and thanks.
Thank you, Gwen.